Welcome to the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. The world is changing faster than ever, and the world of education is too. Advances in psychology, biology, and a whole range of other fields have opened up new lines of thought about the purpose of school and how it can best serve a new generation of students. Join me on the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast every week to explore these new ideas. In last week's episode, I spoke to Dr. Diana Breacher from Toronto Metropolitan University about her work with student wellness, especially about the concepts of positive psychology and building resilience in day-to-day life. In today's episode, I'll be speaking to Dina Mahafza and MarieJo Abdul-Hay about their work with the University of Toronto's UNICEF group. Welcome back to the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. I'm very happy to be joined today by Dina Mahafza and MarieJo Abdul-Hay. These are the Directors of Youth Engagement with the University of Toronto's UNICEF outreach program. And we're also very happy to be bringing them back, in the not too distant future, to be running an assembly presentation and a workshop for our students, introducing them to things, to the projects of UNICEF, especially UofT UNICEF, working with children's rights, working to protect youth and make sure that they are given the services and the care that every child deserves. Mm-hmm. Dina, MarieJo, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much.
We always like to start just giving our audience a sense of who we're talking to. So if you don't mind, let them know who you are, what you're studying at UofT, how you got involved with UofT UNICEF, and anything else that we might find interesting.
Great, thank you for the introduction. So my name is MarieJo, and I'm a fourth year student at UofT. I'm double majoring in physiology and global health with a minor in immunology. I know, it's a lot.
Yeah. You have time to be here with us right now, or shouldn't you be studying?
So I got engaged with UofT UNICEF in my second year. I came in as a volunteer. Last year I was an associate, and now with Dina, I'm one of the co-directors for UofT UNICEF, which has been great so far. And I think I started, looking at opportunities to get more involved with the youth and the community here, because I've worked with children and teenagers with special needs before, and I find it really interesting and fulfilling. And, I just wanted to keep working towards this goal. That's my intro.
Awesome.
Lovely.
Thank you.
So my name is Dina. I'm also in my fourth year. I'm doing a double major in equity studies and political science. Just like MarieJo, I got involved with UofT UNICEF in my second year. We both started as volunteers and same things. So it's really sweet, like having a full circle moment, because we also started as volunteers with Braemar. So very full circle moment, which is really nice. I also have always been interested in anything related to human rights and children's human rights, which is essentially what drew me to UofT UNICEF. I have experiences working with children who are at risk of developing mental health issues for a variety of reasons, which is why I was really excited to get involved, and which is why I'm also excited for this podcast and having these conversations. And I think, really great.
You and me both. Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be talking about stuff like this. It feels like coming out of the COVID pandemic, there's a renewed urgency dealing with all sorts of social issues, but especially things like mental health, providing type of care, even special education programs for children that need it, making sure that care is equitable and accessible. Maybe I missed it in my younger years, but I don't remember the emphasis culturally on these topics earlier in my life, and it seems like it's really coming to the front now. For audience members who may not be familiar, we're going to talk more about University of Toronto's UNICEF work, but the broader United Nations International Child Emergency Fund, I believe now referred to simply as the United Nations Child Fund or Child Care Fund. Can you talk a little bit about their history? What was their foundational goal, and sort of how have they evolved into their current state?
Yeah. Do you want to start, or should I?
Whatever you want.
Okay, I could touch upon this really quick, and
Please.
then I don't know if I missed anything. I know they do a lot to provide financials as well, but they do a lot to raise awareness about children's human rights, and also making the concept of children's human rights accessible for children all over. and it being a conversation that children could easily have, and it not being a topic that is so far beyond, oh, how do we approach this topic? How do we have these conversations with young children as well? So I know that they have their conventions on the rights of the child, and that's something we base a lot of our work on. So just introducing children to the concept of human rights, whether that's access to education, shelter, mental health, things like that. They do a lot to also just raise awareness. I think I'm kind of losing track, so if you want to jump on that.
About the CRC, so what was it?
The conventions,
The
on the rights
convention
of the child.
So I think UNICEF really bases all of its work on those, I think it's around 40 articles.
Yeah.
And, they have this one part where they try to get the children engaged in knowing about their rights and their education and, making sure they're aware of those issues to, especially like taking care of making sure that it's appropriate for their age.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side, it's also globally involving different organizations, governments, to raise awareness about those 40 articles and make sure that they're being respected in different countries. So that's a bit about UNICEF in general. And they also have like the financial part of things where obviously, it's fundraising, because they really need funding to, make sure those articles are being carried out. And
there's a few different points that we could launch from there. The first, it's interesting to me that there's almost a paradox at play when you talk about raising awareness both of children's rights and sort of raising children's awareness of their rights. The convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of Children, 1989, we're in this weird global moment where I think it's called the unipolar moment. Soviet world sort of retreating. There's this sense that, okay, now the sort of developed world can begin to spread these progressive ideas. And it seems like for the first 20 or so years of UNICEF's existence, it was very much a sort of top-down, let's be adults and take care of these children. Let's provide education, medicine, healthcare, the assurance of parental care, safe drinking water, nutrition, etc. But now, sort of in the brief review of the literature that I've done, it seems like there's a big focus on shifting the sort of attitude towards children so that it's not one of we need to save them, but rather we need to give them the tools to self-advocate, adopt an internal locus of control, know their own rights. I think I watched a video on the UNICEF website that was aimed at 3 to 6 year olds, just trying to explain what rights are. And they have this song like about rights. Kind of, I remember growing up with conjunction, junction, what's your function? And now we're learning about children's rights. It's beautiful because it's not, it's trying to get rid of that sort of adultist prejudice and say these are not adults in training. They're not objects to be controlled by adults. They are individuals in their own right, and they deserve to be treated as such. How does your work with the University of Toronto UNICEF connect with that big bundle of stuff that we just finished talking about?
So something to mention about the University of Toronto's UNICEF is that we do have a lot of sectors. So we do have outreach that focus more on raising awareness and engaging through the social media, because I know youth and social media, that's a very big thing, and it's something that we have to tap into. Right. We have other sectors that focus on events and fundraising. And then there's us, youth engagement, who focus on simply engaging the youth. So we work with a variety of age groups. So we kind of have two sections. We work with young children, kids, and we also work with teenagers. So when we do work with kids, like you said, we focus on introducing them to their rights. What are children's human rights? How do we have these conversations? How do we approach these topics? What do they look like? What does a breach of a child's human right look like? And things like that. And then when we work with the teenagers and at a more mature level, we have more mature discussions and more mature conversations about human rights. And what we also love to do is talk about current issues, because we like to involve students not only with just concepts of human rights, but looking at current issues and just kind of bridging the gap between current issues in human rights and what they can do. So something that we love to focus on is not only having discussions with teenagers about these topics, but what can we do? How can we make an impact? How could you make an impact within your community, within your school, within the city, the province, and globally, seeing what we could do on a global scale as well.
So important.
Yeah.
When you keep things in the abstract, and you learn this again and again as a teacher, you may capture a certain percentage of your class, but you're certainly not capturing the majority. You have to make these abstract concepts real to them, and then especially, as you just said, give them a sense of agency in contributing to this issue. So it's not just this external thing that's happening somewhere else, but it's happening to them and to people just like them.
Yeah.
I don't know if the two of you specifically will be coming back, but UofT UNICEF is going to be delivering an assembly presentation for our students, our teenage students, in 2 weeks.
Is it okay if I just add something on
Please,
what
by
Dina
all
said?
means, yeah.
Sorry, thank you. So I just want to say, Dina focuses more on the high school part of things, and I focus more on the children part of things, which is why you might not see me again. But specifically for the children's workshops, as Dina said, we're focused on rights, but also in a playful way. So that could be drawing, acting, singing even. And it's really, some of the workshops that we do are, what are your rights? What's the difference between your rights, your needs, your wants, and really identifying, when your rights are not respected and when your wants are not respected, and who to go to when your rights are not respected. So it's really creating this environment for children at their school to know who to go talk to if there's a serious issue that can be addressed, before it escalates. And I think this is a big part of the youth engagement program at UofT UNICEF. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thanks for bringing it up. My prejudice or my bias is towards teenagers, obviously working so much with them. But before they're teenagers, they are children. And we know that it's not an experience that just goes away, but more and more evidence is beginning to support the notion that we are living with our childhoods. We are sort of living alongside our childish selves all our lives, and that the experiences that register for us as children are basically what frame our sense of security and belonging in this place, our sense of identity, and that doesn't go away just because we turn 18.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? With that said, my experience is working with teenagers, and those same concepts, being able to recognize when your boundaries are being crossed, and then having some avenue to control. Someone who's, a conversation or a mechanism that you can initiate, whereby you are going to be able to expect protection and a response and recognition that your boundaries exist and need to be treated as sacred. Question for both of you. You're working with kids, you're working with teenagers. In your experiences delivering these presentations, assemblies, and workshops, what has been the most impactful for these students? Where are you seeing them really, their eyes lighting up? Where are you seeing them most engaged? And maybe if you feel like it, what does that say about what teenagers and children need in terms of the recognition of their rights?
I feel like, for me, the time where I see children or even high schoolers get most excited about our workshops is when we mention the careers and what do you want to do when you grow up, and they start asking us these questions of what should I do to get involved with UNICEF or humanitarian work, and I think the best time of the workshop is when you tell them that you just have to find something that you're really interested in, and you will find space for this in humanitarian work. I feel like being, kids and teenagers, we have this I don't know what it's called in English. We really have this thinking that I really need to do something extremely bright, or that society think is bright, for me to have space in big global world issues. And I think showing them that, UNICEF has been hiring sanitary workers or people that, are involved in making sure the water connections are working, or just really anything, even obviously teachers, or it doesn't have to be a lawyer or
Right.
a doctor or an engineer. These are like the three things that I hear the most, but that everyone has space in this work and can contribute and really make an impact regardless of where it is. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see how liberating that would be for a student who worries that they need a PhD to impact the
Yeah.
world, and then are told, hey, guess what? You're not that far away. Right?
Yeah.
You can start today.
Yeah,
That's
just
so empowering.
yeah, just like even like being an artist and doing artwork, teaching kids how to express themselves through art could be very impactful and, you know, save children from various like mental health issues, or really like provide the space for them to express what they're feeling and get better without it being a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and we see evidence of that at Braemar and in my experience as a teacher, especially day in, day out. The precursors to mental health issues are often the sense of alienation or dislocation or disassociation that comes from not being able to creatively express yourself, not seeing routes forward to purpose and meaningful impact in the world. You say, oh, I'm only going to be able to be ... and therefore my identity isn't important. Right? So I need to, you almost see this retraction from connection with their own emotions, right? With their own communities, with anything, the things that give vibrancy in life. And it sounds like UNICEF isn't just in tune with providing for the basic material needs of children, but is very much in tune with their emotional needs and their mental health needs, which is great to hear. Yeah.
100%. Something to add on, I think basically that was the answer, but something else to add on. Some of the experiences that I've had working with the teenagers, and I see like their eyes light up and they get so excited, is when we have discussions or debates. I think that's a great way to get them involved. I know some teenagers don't like talking as much, which is fine. But I think what I've noticed throughout time is that if we take a certain topic and we say, okay, let's look at the positives and let's look at the negatives, and let's tie in our own personal experiences, that really gets the students engaged. They think, okay, what experiences do I have? What do I think of this? And I think that's a great way for them to learn, is learning through one another and hearing the other perspective. I think that's really great, because I know that they leave the workshop not just learning from us as like, we don't want to just come here and lecture you. We want to have these discussions. We want to hear diverse perspectives. I want to hear about, oh, for example, how are you impacted by this? Oh, what experiences do you have with, for example, globalization, or what experiences do you have with whatever it could be? So I think hearing diverse perspectives is really important, and it leaves the students questioning themselves even afterwards. So they do their own research. Something comes up in the news, they have a different perspective, or they remember a student's perspective or a student's experiences, and they tie that in as well. So I think that's something that I think the high schoolers really enjoy, is when we do have these discussions. The first 2 minutes are always kind of quiet, but then once the ball gets rolling, it gets a lot better.
Well, I'm familiar with the immediate silence after asking a question, but yeah, it usually does. One person talks and then 12 people talk. It happens very quickly. And I think that's a perfect example of sort of where we started this conversation, with the idea of moving away from adultism, not assuming that just because they're young that their opinions are somehow invalid or not as important, and then showing them that, right? Saying your opinion is worthwhile enough for this group to sit quietly and listen to it, right? And we respect your critical process, and we're going to respect someone who disagrees with you too, right? So that when you go home, you don't have to feel like you're on a team that is antagonistic to the other side. You may actually be curious about what they think, and that spurs B towards the type, like you said, watching the news, right? My goodness, a teenager watching the news. This is like my dream. Braemar now, we know that viewership and especially engagement with social issues, global issues, is pretty low among youth. But I think it's exactly those types of debate settings and interactive, validating settings that spur on that next engagement, right? Giving them a reason to pay attention to something that they may have grown up thinking of as boring and irrelevant, right? And I look at the UNICEF website, first link at the top is what we do. And the first 10 or so points that you see, it's Afghanistan, it's Rohingya in Myanmar, it's Syria, it's Ukraine, it's the Horn of Africa, etc. You can see a student's eyes glazing over if you just say that to them and then start preaching about those circumstances. But if you actually show them, I'm interested in what you think about this stuff. What have you heard? What have you experienced? Is there something similar in your experience to what we're seeing here? All of a sudden, it's like the entire experience flips, and you may well be launching that student into a life of conscientious, aware care. Right? Let's get more specific. You're walking into Braemar in a couple weeks. You're walking into a primary school whenever's next. What does a UofT UNICEF student engagement experience look like? Can we get some examples of the types of things that you do with them?
Yeah, so for me, I think I can speak, kind of merge both the high school and the children's experience, since I've been involved in both.
Yeah.
And I think really before walking in, you really have to prepare. And really, well, first you have to see, is the workshop online? Is it in person? Do you want to accommodate both? I think that's something new that's been coming up with the pandemic, and that it's still present. And, seeing what's the best way to deliver this information to the target age group. Yeah, so I think grabbing the attention of the students, and asking them how they would like to go about this, telling them what we're thinking of doing and if they're okay with this. And then really hearing what they have to say before lecturing them, which we really try not to do. Because most of the time they know the points that we want to touch upon, and they're aware. I think they know more than we think they know. And that's really something that I've learned throughout the 3 years that I've been at UofT UNICEF. So yeah, giving them space to express themselves and tell us what they know. And I think we really we're just here to I think moderate and, make sure the workshop is running smoothly, but they're really doing most of the work. So yeah.
You would make a wonderful education school instructor.
Thank
you. Coming through my Bachelor of Education, the number of times I heard, don't be the mage on the stage, be the guide on the side. Right? I can't get it out of my head. In pedagogical terms, we call what you were just describing the co-construction of success criteria.
I did not know
there
that was
you go.
an actual thing.
Yeah. Say it to a teacher in your life,
You're
they'll be
natural.
impressed with you. But the reason we emphasize it so much is for everything you just said, right? That this is the way you get students engaged. This is the way you validate them as people in front of you, instead of just immediately putting them in that position of somehow less than or lower than you. I am the expert. I'm up here. I'm going to inform you. You're welcome. No, this is an egalitarian space. This is conversational. So important. Yeah.
Yeah, and similar to the high school students, something I love doing is before we go and have a workshop with a specific class, I would love to know what that class is learning about and what they're doing, because I think a fundamental thing we like to do is bring in those class concepts and then approaching them from a new lens or through a new activity. So something that I love doing, which I touched upon, was engaging the students in the class. Again, whether that's through a debate, we don't like the lecturing style like we just talked about. So I always like to make sure that there is at least 2 or 3 activities to involve the students, whether that's a debate, whether that's a discussion with us, whether we watch a video and then share our thoughts, whether we play a game, or whether it's a Quizlet situation, whatever it is, engaging the students is a really important part. And then, bringing in those concepts, bringing in those class concepts, and just showing them that these class concepts, we can see them beyond just the classroom. We can see them outside. We can see them in our day-to-day. And then let's look at these class concepts from a different lens. And how can we personally relate to these class concepts, for example? So that kind of fits in with more of the social sciences classes. But I think in some other classes as well, you could tie them into some current issues. You could tie them into personal experiences. And I think, that's what we aim to do as well.
Well, certainly, I can imagine how it would be difficult to connect the goals of UofT UNICEF with a calculus class or a physics class. But the precursors to success in those classes, just like all classes, are the same things that we talk about when we enumerate the rights of children, right? If you are not receiving appropriate nutrition, if you're not in a place where you feel secure sleeping, if you haven't experienced some healthy engagement with nature or a bit of exercise over the course of the last few days, you're not going to be able to succeed in calculus or physics. Yeah. And so I don't know if that's an entry point for getting some of those classes in front of your group, but I would go to the mat arguing for its applicability and value for any class that you might put in front of it.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned malnutrition,
Mhm.
and I
Oh,
think
yeah.
tying biology to malnutrition is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Although I will say I learned more about it in college, so I'm learning about it right now, which is unfortunate. Like, I wish it was introduced earlier. But I think you would be surprised at like the number of things you learn in high school that you think are completely useless, but you end up using them more than you would ever think you would use them. So
And in the classroom or outside the classroom?
yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
I think I think outside the classroom, you can see how you would use them outside the classroom because this is where you learn them. But in the classroom, you're just sitting and thinking like, what is this?
Mhm.
You know? And I think later in life, you'd be surprised how much you would use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's here another bit of pedagogy for you. Something called Cobb's learning cycle. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
Okay, it's this fella in, I think, 87. He came out with this concept for basically how do you turn information into learned knowledge, which is somewhat useful for a teacher to know.
Just a little.
Yeah, and he talked about moving something from basically from being an observer, total abstract observation, to some critical thinking, to an engagement and experimentation, to demonstration and sort of the competition, the tournament, the performance or whatever. And then you go back and you reflect again. And he talks about this cycle. It's very intuitive. There have been adjustments to it that indicate some instruction is sort of necessary somewhere in this cycle.
Yeah.
But it's surprising to see how little direct lecturing and direct instruction fit into what we know about learning psychology today. So students are going in, they're getting that sort of observation and then critical thinking, and you talk about debate and games. These are some of the best ways, quizzing, right? We know these are the best ways to make students remember things and to really engage their full selves in an experience. But what makes me even more excited about bringing groups like yours in is that right afterwards, they get to go out into downtown Toronto and see how some of these ideas that you're discussing, the inequalities, the services that are required for people just to live a life of dignity. What does that look like on street level? And we're so lucky to be surrounded by examples of the very best care that can be provided for people and examples of people who are dramatically underserved. And now students are witnessing that, having already thought about how it applies to their life, having been given a sort of breadth of understanding of the issues that are at play. And I think they're so much better prepared to not just understand, but engage safely and meaningfully in those settings they find themselves in. So a huge thank you to you and everybody on your team and people like you, because the impact that it has on our students isn't just long-term, right? It's going to be the very day that you talk to them. And
thank
if
you
we could
so
have groups
much.
like that all the time, hopefully more and
glad
more,
to
but
know
we will.
that.
Yeah, you're making a big impact.
Thank you so much.
Do you see that? Where are you seeing the goals associated with UNICEF, maybe the long-term or even the more recent goals expressed in the Right to Childhood campaign? Success stories and perhaps the ongoing challenges that are being faced, both from your perspective as the UofT UNICEF engagement directors and UNICEF as a larger international body?
Okay. So, something that we see with UNICEF's new not new, but UNICEF's mission and vision towards centering the rights of the child and all the activities that come with that. For me personally, mental health is a big aspect of that. And I think destigmatizing mental health, especially for children and teenagers, I think that's a very important thing. From the North American perspective, we do see the destigmatization of mental health, but that doesn't say that we don't have a long way to go as well. And I think especially working with really young children and also working with teenagers, it's really important to discuss mental health. It's an essential part of our upbringing and how we interact with the people around us, with our environments, and how we go about our future. It's really nice seeing schools and community centers and whatever bodies really prioritizing mental health nowadays. I think that's very important. And seeing the support systems in place, that's really great. I mean, I even think back to my time in high school, and I remember, not having these support systems or just generally not feeling comfortable going to for example, my teachers or my guidance counselors or whoever it may be. So I think that's something we want to work towards. So I know UNICEF really prioritizes that, but it's something that we also, as UofT UNICEF, want to prioritize, and we want to talk about mental health with our students and what that may look like and the effects, and kind of destigmatizing this, and just on a global scale, kind of stepping back from the notion that, oh, for young children, oh, a lot of people go through these emotions, oh, a lot of people are unstable at this time, or, oh, just, you know, the common misconceptions of, oh, you're just lazy, for example. These things can really damage a young child and a teenager and how they interact with the world in the future. So yeah, that's something I really wish to not only center, but keep prioritizing going forward and in whatever workshops, and even just providing resources at the end of workshops. I think that's really important as well. That's something I hope we can really put forth.
Yeah, you said it. It's at one and the same time heartening to see how much emphasis that even our broad culture is putting on the issue of mental health and the destigmatization of it. It's kind of that, I don't know if it's paradox, but like the more you know, the more there is to criticize, right? So like as we are being informed, thank goodness, and as we are coming to understand what a lot of these poor mental health outcomes look like in real life, and maybe where some of them are caused, it's nice to be enlightened, but it's also very scary and kind of shocking to see the extent of poor mental health and its outcomes around our society. We just had Covenant House in to give a presentation yesterday, and they work with youth homeless around all over Canada, but especially here in Toronto. Some of the numbers, 20% of all homeless in Canada are under the age of 18, and something like 60% plus struggle with some form of mental illness. And we're across the street from Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and we see the good work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But these problems are not going away anytime soon, and we need all hands on deck, groups like yours, educators everywhere, talking about this stuff constantly and really providing some actionable analyses beyond, as you said, my least favorite word in the English vocabulary, beyond the bad story that you are lazy, or, oh, you're just sad, or you're a procrastinator, right?
Yeah.
It's not what's going on in these kids, and we need to be a little bit more well-informed, right? MarieJo, do you see successes in some of the work that you're doing with younger people?
Let me think. I wanted to touch upon something a bit different.
Please.
That is a bit related. I think, we were mentioning how I guess we should include like teenagers, for example, in their education and in those global issues. And I think a different way to see this, it's being newly done also by UNICEF, is to engage locals into the problems that their countries are facing. I think, we have this perspective that an adult has to teach a child, or someone that is more educated or in the Western world or Europe has to come into those developing countries and tell them what to do to get better. And I think, UNICEF is newly been addressing those very false perceptions and, this very, this wrong way of doing things, I think, because really they've been, if you look at the job descriptions that they've been posting over the years, it started by being, you only need to speak English, to you need to speak the local language, or we could find you a work visa, to you need to be able to work in this country. And this really encouraged locals to apply to these positions and really puts them at the center of the issues and gives them power to address those issues, because I think we all know that locals know best their countries, and they know how those issues have been arising over the years, and they probably know most obstacles that they will face along the way, which it would take a long time for a foreigner to discover. And I think UNICEF has, in this way, it's also recognizing that locals are educated enough, and we just need to give them space and funding and audience to be able to, have their perspective be heard and address those issues. Maybe that's a bit not too related to the question, but that's what comes to mind in success stories.
Yeah, and thank you so much for making a point of saying it we're an international high school, and we're reminded again and again of how important it is to recognize the competence, the more expert capacity working within that culture that these students have, right? And we try to do our best to give them the information they need to understand perhaps some of the differences that exist between our culture, the assumptions that underlie it, and theirs. But we all need reminding that these people are not in need of saving, right? Like these are the ones who are going to do the saving, right? And kids can help kids, and Iranians can help Iranians, and it doesn't have to be all top down, right? Certainly, if we can fundraise, if we can provide money, if we can provide education, etc., we should be, but always in coordination, right? Always in coordination with the people who are living that reality day to day.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we got a couple hundred students in this school who are creative and full of life and eager to change their worlds.
Yeah.
What sort of advice would you give a 14 to 18-year-old, or maybe even someone younger who's looking to take the next step in beginning to impact their world in a positive way?
I can start by tackling this question. I know it's always hard. I remember being at that age and seeing issues going on around me and thinking, what can I do about it? What can I do about it? I think a good place to start is probably fundraising. I know people in general may think, oh, maybe fundraising is not so impactful, but I do think fundraising does have a large impact, because in some communities, finances are really what drives change. Something else I would say is look within your community, see what your community is lacking, or see what your community needs support in and where your community needs help. Let's say your community has issues regarding shelter, or your community has issues regarding food security, things like that. Just look around you and see what you feel passionate about and where you can get involved, because I think that's a great thing. I remember doing that myself. When I was doing my volunteer hours for high school, I remember thinking, 40 hours, what am I going to do for 40 hours? I have to be passionate about something. And then that's how I started my work with kids who were at risk of developing mental health issues. And I remember looking into my community and seeing, okay, this is a reach out center for kids. I want to work there. I want to get involved over there. So I think that's a big thing for students. Find something you're passionate about, and then see how you can get involved in your community. Because I think starting within your community is very important in order to make change on, let's say, a national scale or on a global scale. So I think start small, and then you'll find momentum and you'll build on from there.
Yeah, there's an idea in there that I think is really intuitive, or really insightful, I should say. The psychologist Angela Duckworth talks about how she doesn't like the notion of following your passion. We tend to tell that to students a lot as a way of getting out of the conversation, right? Just follow your passion, right? As though they have this bright shining star somewhere in the future and they already know what it is. And she would say, no, we need to be in the constant fluid process of responding to what's inside of us in the development of a passion. Is there a checklist or an inventory that students could go down just to kind of ask themselves which of these most appeals to me? Like when we have our students look for volunteering opportunities, we use volunteertoronto.ca. They have a search opportunities function, and it'll list work with animals, work with the elderly, work with children, work in the arts, right? Work in the environment, tree planting, etc. Right? And they may not be able ahead of that time to say to me exactly what they're interested, but when they go down that list, it helps them to say, oh, yeah, that's probably my number one, and there's my number two. Helps to clarify the issue a bit. If instead of telling our students, follow your passion and you'll help the world, can we give them a little bit of clarity on what exactly is available to them in terms of the categories of help?
Yeah, I think how I would personally go about it is it's just a Google search away. Just type down what are some things that I could be involved in right now. Who needs help? What community needs help? If you can't find something you're passionate about within your own community, and then see if there are organizations that tackle those issues. And if there are, so if there is, it's great, and you can just shoot them an email. Be like, I'm a high school student. I'm really interested. How can I get involved? But if there isn't, I feel like a lot of teenagers just stop at that and look for something else. But I would say go for it. Try to start up your own thing. I think a lot of teenagers are And I was like this at the time, a few years ago, where you're just like, oh, I'm just a 14-year-old, just a 16-year-old. What can I do?
Yeah.
You can do so much. I think we just underestimate ourselves so much in our creativity and in what we can think of as solutions. I think teenagers can be very innovative, in just starting up an idea. It could start small or you could go big. I think teenagers are too scared of failure sometimes, and I think we all are, even as like adults and young adults. But as long as you're not doing any harm, right? If you can start this organization, this student club with your friends, you can start small. Start with like a movie night or whatever it is to just raise awareness. And then little by little, you can build up on this. And who knows, maybe this will be your work in the future. You'll open an NGO. This is how most NGOs are started up anyways. So I think really seeing your potential, and I know it's hard, and when you start up this initiative, you might not see it. You will probably most of the time think that it's not going to work out. But you would be surprised sometimes at how big of an impact you can have, or small of an impact, but you're still working towards this issue. And by the time, in a few years, you will look around and see that you're not by yourself anymore, that this grew and it's going somewhere. So, yeah.
It's so well said, MarieJo.
Thank you.
Again, I couldn't agree more. It strikes me that we do a much better job encouraging some of the values you just described in the realm of entrepreneurialism with our young people, right? We say, chase failure, right?
Yeah.
Now is the time to be experimenting, to be creative. Who knows what it's going to turn into, right? Go start your own business. And it's funny, we don't do the same with altruism, or not to the same extent. I really hope that people are starting to realize, and I think UNICEF's values cohere with this quite tightly, that children are not lesser adults, right? They're not, I said adults in training earlier, right? They're not, their primary function is not to become adults. We need to start realizing that children have a reservoir of a type of intelligence and especially a plasticity of their brain. Like their brain can change so much more powerfully and so much more quickly than ours. We need to start respecting and using children as the resource that they are, because we're clearly not creative enough as adults to solve some of the problems that are besetting us in our very fast-paced world.
Absolutely.
I spoke with our art director a few podcasts ago, and we talked about some of the studies that have been done around divergent thinking or lateral thinking and children's capacity for creativity. And they are, to summarize the studies very quickly, they are basically geniuses of creativity when they're born. And their first 20 years are basically a descent into the mediocrity of adulthood, right? And it tracks. It's almost a direct line. They're like 100% geniuses when they're 2 years old. They're like 50% genius level when they're 10 or 12, and then by the time they're 18, they've basically lost that remarkable ability to think radically outside the box, right? And when we talk about problems that we've been facing socially and globally for a century or more, right? Clean water, right? Getting kids in classrooms, making sure people have a roof over their head, right? Are we really in 2022 with the richest global economy in the history of the world, and we're still seeing these issues rampant by the millions, right? I think it's time we started asking some kids for some advice on this stuff, because our solutions are certainly lacking some creativity, I think.
Yeah, I think really trying to get a team of both adults and younger people, because younger people can get you the root idea, the amazing, creative, innovative idea. And then the adults can come in and say, how do we tackle this though? Because this will come up. And, because I think when you're a teenager, you see, you can imagine all those different opportunities and initiatives that you can undertake, but you might not think of the obstacles that might come up, and just having someone come in and, chat with you about the potential things that might come up that can get you to think about, okay, how can I address those then within this solution that I've been thinking about?
I think we see great examples of it and most people are familiar with Greta Thunberg and Malala, and I wish I had his name at hand, but the young gentleman, they just made a Netflix documentary about him, who's doing clean energy through wind turbine power in East Africa. These are teenagers, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right, and I don't know if anyone's made more of an impact on the fight against climate change than Greta Thunberg, and she started when she was 12, very, very young, right? She did something that we as adults have yet to be able to do since the Silent Spring, right? Like in 50 years. And she did it when she was 12.
Yeah, and just to add on, I think youth advocacy is very important, and youth have a voice, and I think they should use that, because even coming from a youth perspective is very important, because you make your demands as youth very well heard and very at the center of everything, especially when it comes to issues of climate change. We do see the youth advocating for a better approach to climate change, because they say we are going to be on this earth for way longer. We want to live on this earth in a specific way. So we want to advocate for this. And I've been seeing at least the shift in the past 5 years of youth advocacy and youth engagement when it comes to climate change. And it's been really great to see. And I think if we could get youth involved in so many other aspects, that would be really important, because I think it's really important. And like we were all saying, bridging the gap between quote unquote adulthood and quote unquote youth, and then how we can find solutions within each other. I think that's really important.
And UNICEF has been doing that. They have a platform I've seen it on Instagram, but it's called Voice of Youth. And it's completely dedicated to, it's kind of like a podcast, like what we're doing right now. It's, they film teenagers, even children in their own country, maybe their day-to-day life, and they ask them questions about the issues that they're seeing. How could they be fixed? And it just gives them a platform to talk about what they think, their opinions, and hopefully reach a wider audience that can actually fund this project. Yeah, that's the one thing. Maybe in the future, kids are going to have a lot more money than they do right now, but that's the one thing that I think they still need us for. When you mentioned the fact that children are, of course, going to be on this planet much longer than us, and so they may be in a more valid position of concern when it comes to these long-term issues. I was reminded of, I don't know if you're familiar with the effective altruism movement and Will McCaskill and Peter Singer, and especially some of their recent ideas around long-termism or futurism, where we ask the ethical question, do the people of the future matter ethically? Do the unborn matter ethically as much as the people who are sitting in front of you right now? Maybe this is just more of a personal question, but do you have any thoughts on that issue, and maybe how we as educators, we as people who work with children, can begin to take more of these long-termist ideas into our approach?
I think a big aspect of that is recognizing that it's not all about you. It's about a community. It's about a people. And when we take a bigger and bigger look at this, it's about your community, your school, your city, your province, your nation, and as a globe, as a earth. We are all people. We are all here living together. So I think that's the one thing we all need to prioritize, and we all need to center, that it's not just about us. All the decisions that we make, we have to consider other people as well. Future plans and future policies and things that we are advocating for, or things that we are kind of questioning, we should take into consideration everyone's perspective and everyone's experience and how this is going to affect everyone, because that's how we ensure that everything is equitable. I think that's the main thing, is not just thinking about yourself, but thinking about yourself in relation to everyone else.
What I can think of is specifically history and geography teachers. One idea that just came up is when teaching the class about the history of the country, or like different countries, and how we are currently seeing those issues that are a result of the previous conflicts. Sensitizing the class and the teenagers about, this is what previous people did wrong, and you are right now you will be those people for the next generation in a few years. That could be a century, but really reminding, how can I say this? Having the class be aware of the impact that they can have in 100 years, by looking at the impact that their ancestors had on them, but thinking about, what if my ancestors thought about this? I wouldn't be in the situation right now. I think is a great way to, have them engage more in those issues and really take initiative in this sense. Yeah.
It's a funny thing. Obviously, when you're a youth, in a lot of our cultures, certainly when I think we were growing up, you get this feeling that you're waiting for life to begin, right? And that maybe once life begins 10 years from now, then I'll be able to start having an impact on what's going to happen later. And I think especially right now, 21st century, we're looking at issues where we say, or maybe we're inclined to say, well, this is already over, right? Like climate change is already happening, right? There's nothing I can do, or this economic recession is already happening. There's nothing I can do. And as you say, if we're able to educate and provide some context to these young people, like we are in the midst of contributing to the climate change disaster, right? That's something like more than half of all carbon emissions have taken place in the last, within this generation, right? It's not just something that we can blame our parents and our grandparents for. We are still in the midst of this. And I think placing a young person in that context can be very empowering, because you're no longer waiting for the life to begin, and you no longer think that it's already happened to you and that you're sort of afloat in the ocean, but that rather you are in the prime position to impact not just people who come long after you, but people you are among right now. I want to take the end of this conversation and turn it a little bit more towards university life. Assuming some of our high school, our teenagers are looking across the street every single day at the University of Toronto and saying, "Ooh, those are some pretty cool buildings. I want to learn there." You've obviously, you're in the latter stages of your undergrads. You got engaged with the extracurricular life of your school and have begun to make a real impact as volunteers and as workers with UNICEF. What can I say to the young people that I'm working with every day, or what would you say to them to encourage them on a similar path as they kind of stare out into that vast, yawning potential?
You can do it. What's stopping you?
Yeah.
I mean, Dina and I did it. How are we better than you? I was pretty lost in first year.
Same.
I applied to UofT as a joke, not thinking I would get
Seriously?
it. Yeah.
Wow.
And I did.
Yeah.
And now I'm here. And I really struggled in first year. And I think that says, like, most first years, like, it's the
Same. Yeah.
like, yeah, it's
I
like
struggled.
a pretty common experience, I would say, to struggle in first year. And I couldn't find my way to chemistry class for a month, but I'm still here and I'm graduating soon. So I think really just when something doesn't work out, it's very easy to give up. And I'm guilty of that. I thought so many times of just quitting. But looking back, if I did quit, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be graduating. And I did it. Like, I think everyone has the potential in them to do what they want to do. If obviously you have to put in the effort, but sometimes you just don't have it in you. And it's okay to just take a break and take a step back and think about, is this really for you? And for me, it was the case, and I wanted to stay. And for some people, it might not be. But looking, if you really want to study at UofT, it could be right now, or you might not get in and it could be in your master's or your PhD, or you could just study somewhere else and end up being a professor at UofT. So I think there's so many different ways to get involved in all the different places that you want to be at. So for example, for me, I wanted to be part of UNICEF, hopefully, and I might not work with them in the future, but I think this being co-director of the youth engagement program at UofT UNICEF really satisfies this part of me. And I think, we really try, usually for me at least, I really think of, this specific job, like this specific target. I have to be exactly in this place without looking at all the different options that are available to be in the same environment. So obviously I hope, they get into the university they want to get into, but this is just for people that might not get in. We're not better than you for getting in. Sometimes it's just luck, and you might be around in the future. Like life doesn't stop at undergrad. But yeah, I think if you want to.
Yeah, no, 100%. Just to add to that, I really struggled in first year too. And I think if anyone is on that path of thinking of doing undergrad and going to university, I think not to expect to struggle, but it's not an easy path to take. So I think try things out and don't be too scared of failure, because it's essentially inevitable, but just know that you can prove yourself wrong. If this is something you want, if this is something you know that you want to pursue, you can overcome these obstacles. Obstacles are always going to be there. You can overcome them. The other thing to say is, it's hard adjusting. No one really talks about this. I remember everyone used to tell me in my high school, like, oh, it's going to be so fun. It's going to be so exciting. I remember all my teachers even telling me, it's going to be the best time of your life. And I remember thinking, well, I can't wait to go there. And then I go in with these really high expectations. And then I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, reality is here. Okay, is this something I really want? I also had to kind of like take a step back and think, is this what I really want? Is this what I'm doing? What am I pursuing? What am I going to do in the future? I had to really sit with myself. So I think sitting with oneself is really important. And then try things out and find something that you are quote unquote passionate about, or something that you are interested in. I remember in second year, I came to myself and thought, okay, I want to try and get a bit more involved. And that's when I found UofT UNICEF. And that's when I started getting involved in extracurriculars and getting involved on campus. And I found that it made my experience a lot better. I remember in first year being so focused on my academics, and I have to be so successful, and I have to do this, and this, and that. I remember, okay, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to find things that make my university experience more fulfilling.
Big capital T thank you to both of you. And Dina, we're looking forward to having you back here in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much.
This has been great. This is the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. I'm Mike Helsby with Dina Mahafza and MarieJo Abdul-Hay from UofT. Thanks for being with us today, and I hope you enjoyed the topic.